Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk, and sometimes you can find me at ukastrologer.co.uk. So hello, how are you? Now, I've had a chart from a listener who has very kindly volunteered their chart. And this is what she said in her first email to me. I listened to your podcast and just wanted to volunteer my natal chart. If you ever need a chart to use for your podcast, I know my exact birth time as verified by my parents and birth certificate. My date of birth is blah, 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 blah. And I was born in la, 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 la. I love your podcast. Thank you. So I got back to her and obviously thanked her because she is sharing her chart with us so that we can help with your learning, because this podcast is all about learning astrology. So because I said, if you've got any major questions you want to know about your chart, because it's not like I'm not doing a reading here, but we're going to go through the questions that she's raised. And she's raised two interesting questions. So one of which is, I've wondered whether having Pluto in my first house makes me think often about death and matters relating to death. I don't necessarily think about death in a negative or morbid way, but I do feel I'm more aware of death and my own mortality than other people I know. I feel like it's a positive trait because knowing and accepting death allows me to enjoy the beauty and briefness of life. When I was a child, if I had an accident and saw myself bleeding, I always thought I was dying, brackets, lol. Also, growing up, at one point, I wanted to become a mortician. Instead, I became a registered nurse. So I would say I have a bit of a fascination with death, but also a healthy fear of it as well. I also have several planets retrograde in my natal chart, and I'm not really clear on how those retrograde planets would affect my chart. Anyway, thank you for writing back to me, and if you need more volunteers, just get in touch. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day. So I'm looking at their chart. So let's always, when you look at a chart, the most important things, if you've got a correct birth time, are the ascendant and the sun and the moon signs and their locations. Nothing much else is going to be more important than that. Now, in answer to your question, and we're going to call her Wendy. So, hello, Wendy. That's not your name, but we're going to call you Wendy. Wendy, having Pluto in the first house doesn't equal anything to do with death whatsoever. Pluto is about deep change and transformation. There isn't especially one planet that governs death, and as I've demonstrated quite a few times in various different episodes, that when we die, it's not always a Saturn thing or a Pluto thing. I chose a chart example once of my younger sister when she died. When she passed, Jupiter was the planet that helped her go to the other side. So just want to make clear that Pluto as a thing hasn't necessarily got anything to do with or about death. And if we look at older astrology, so medieval astrology, so that's all your whole sign astrology and your medieval astrology and going back in the day, so not Babylonian astrology, but medieval astrology, Saturn was very much considered the grim reaper, and he was the one that was going to catch you on your passing. So Saturn isn't a fun planet in any way. But I wouldn't say that Pluto being in the first house would make you think more often about death and matters relating to death, because that's your question, okay? Because you said, having Pluto in my first house, because the question is wondered, is it makes me think often about death and matters relating to death. Because I think we'd be making quite a sweeping generalisation if we said everybody that's got Pluto in the first house is going to be thinking about death all of the time. And I'm not going to go to Astro Databank and check and get Pluto in the first house charts and are these people morticians or funeral directors or whatever. In fact, I know used to this a long time ago, so one of the last times I had to use a funeral director within the family. The funeral directors, Mr. and Mrs. that ran the business, I don't know if they're still in it because this is a while ago, the Mr. and Mrs. that ran the business were both Aries. And if there's a sign of the zodiac that I really wouldn't associate with death at all, in my mind, it would definitely be Aries. But that's not why they were running the business. It wasn't about death per se. It was about that they wanted to be leaders in what they were doing, because Aries is very much a leadership sign. So you could have certain people in certain occupations that aren't astrologically associated with the work that they're in because they're doing the work for different reasons. Yeah. Now, obviously, one has to quote when one is making sweeping generalizations, like myself saying Pluto in the first house. Anthony Lewis's Oreo Astrology, Plain and Simple, page 16, gives rulerships of planets. And he says, Pluto, powerful forces, sexuality, penetration, the underworld, rebirth, transformation, transition, the unconscious, death, and Berkeley, whoever he is, adds injection. Saturn, the greater malefic, obstacles, limitations, loss, restrictions, gravity, falls, seriousness, hardness, delays, aging, old people, debts, poverty, real estate, construction, time, inertia, austerity, tribulations, karma, death, loneliness, solitary people, plumbers, the father. So Pluto and Saturn are, inverted commas, death associated planets, and the first house is the beginnings. So he's saying new arrivals, beginnings, interests, personal interests, initiative, efforts to get ahead, etc. In just regular astrology, the first house represents the head and the face, actually. But it's also how we tackle life. Now, your Pluto isn't conjunct your ascendant either. It's 5 degrees Libra, 5 degrees Libra retrograde, and your ascendant is 23 degrees and 48 minutes and 58 seconds into Virgo. So there's a 7 and 5 is 12 degree. It's not conjunct the ascendant. Yeah. And then if we're asking the question of what is it that you think about, if we're thinking of thinking, we have to look at Mercury, because Mercury is all about what we think about. So it's Mercury's how we communicate, and I've covered this on a podcast as well, that Mercury is what we talk about and what we think about. So your Mercury, even though your sun sign is Aries, it's in the 7th, and your moon is in Cancer in the 10th. Your Mercury is in Pisces in the 6th, and the 6th is health and healing, etc. And it forms a square to your Mars and also to your Neptune. So, and your Neptune's retrograde as well, because you've got 3 outer planets, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto retrograde, but that's going to happen to a considerable amount of people, especially everybody in your year at school. They're going to have those outer planets all retrograde anyway. So we won't talk about retrogrades because it's not, inverted commas, an issue in your chart. Yeah. But your Mercury in Pisces is far more imaginative than were your Mercury in the sign of Aries, because that's the sign of zodiac that you are. And your Mercury can only ever be in the sign that your sun sign is, or the 2 adjacent signs, one either side. So an Aries person can only ever have their Mercury in Pisces, Aries or Taurus. Okay. Now, with it forming a square to your Neptune, that maximises it, because Neptune's the ruling planet to Pisces. It's in your third house of communication. This is your Neptune, by the way. And so that you're thinking and you're learning anyway, because the third house is how we think. The sixth house is our health. You're going to have, again, more imagination about how you communicate. Yeah. Now, your Pluto is opposition to your sun sign. Okay, I'm not taking that away from you. There's a definite opposition, because your Pluto is retrograde 5 degrees into sign of Libra, and your sun sign is 10 degrees and 50 something or other, 49 minutes and 56 seconds. The sun sign is 10 degrees, so it's a definite opposition. It's not exact, because it'd have to be 5 to 5, but we can go up to 9 degrees as an aspect orb. So your Pluto in the first house people, one of the first computer programs I ever used, the guy that wrote it, the interpretation that he gave for Pluto in the first house was that you would like to be the hero in a Victorian novel. So there's drama associated with it. So Pluto near to the ascendant or in the first house, that there will always be something transformative and deeply changing, whatever going on. So you might find that you can get caught up in these deeper areas of life. And if we're talking about the subject of death, that is a pretty deep subject. So I wouldn't say that you having Pluto in your first house is denoting that you are more likely to be thinking about death. And I hear what you're saying about it, that you don't think of it as a negative or morbid way. Hurrah, good, because some people do. But I wouldn't say that that was necessarily the case. But you are going to want to be immersed into, because this is your first house, and this is how we tackle life and where we're going to go if we get stressed, into things that are far more dramatic. So if we think of Pluto can be in the first house more inclined towards some sort of, and I don't mean drama in a Leo sort of way, I mean that you're probably brilliant in a crisis. Most people with Pluto in the first house, depending on what sign it's in and what else it's aspecting, can be pretty good in a crisis. Yeah. So now you said that you didn't become a mortician, you became a registered nurse. But excuse me, nurses will be dealing constantly with life and death and everything else in between. And you've got a Virgo ascendant, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and your Mercury is in the 6th. So you've made your career beautifully, I think, because the 6th house is health and healing, and your ruling planet, your chart, is located there. Yeah. So I don't know that you would have been particularly happy about being a mortician if you just sort of used the energies of your Pluto opposition to your sun sign. Okay. Now, there definitely are houses that are associated with death. So the 8th house is death, procreation, sex, surgery, injury, transformation, rebirth, restructuring, other people's money. Blah, blah, blah. The 12th is not really a death house. Seclusion, undoing, personal failings, hospitalisation. I tend to think of the 12th house as the hidden house. So the two houses that are the most secretive, that are less likely to reveal themselves to us, is the 8th and the 12th, and yours are empty, but we could do rulers to them, because your 12th house starts in the sign of Leo. The ruler to that is the sun's in the 7th, so close personal relationships are very important to you. And then your 8th house starts in the sign of Aries, ruled by Mars, and your Mars is in the 9th, conjunct your MC, and in your 9th house of spirituality. So there's going to be a connection between death, because the 8th house is death, sex, procreation, other people's money, investments, etc. Mars, which is the ruling planet, your sun sign anyway. You're going to want, you will probably have certain beliefs about death anyway, for sure. You're going to have your version of things, which you've said, because you don't think of it necessarily as being negative or morbid. Most people don't come across death very often. Most people obviously have their parents die, and that's a fact unless they die before their parents. So I've had numbers of clients that have never experienced any death at all, by the time they come for the reading, that is. And then the only ones they ever do experience is the parents, because they haven't got any siblings and they haven't got married and blah, 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 blah. So, and I'm talking about close personal deaths, like family deaths. And then I can have other clients where people are dying left, right and centre, and parents died when they were young, and siblings have died, and partners have died in car accidents and car crashes and shootings and various different things. So there's a broad spectrum of what people's experiences are of death. Now, judging by where you're born, because you're born in the US, I would make a sweeping generalisation there that in the US, death isn't on people's lips. It's not something that is talked about that much. It's a much more, inverted commas, optimistic type of country. The energies in the US is much more upbeat than it might be in the UK. So where I live, in England, which is part of the United Kingdom, people are a bit more Saturnian and slow. How are you? I'm not bad, rather than I'm good. So there's, but again, people don't really like talking about death anyway, and it's really difficult to get them to do it. You know, if they're ill, you know, are you worried about death? La la la. But as far as thinking about it, wonder whether Pluto, my first house, makes me think often about death and matters relating to death. I don't think so. I've got Pluto in the first house. I've got a Leo ascendant, so I've got, like yourself, you've got a Virgo ascendant and Pluto in Libra. I've got my Pluto in a different sign to my ascendant sign. So I've got an ascendant sign of Leo, and I've got my Pluto in Virgo. And trust me, I'd prefer not to think about death. I've covered it, and I've had it happen a lot to me. Unfortunately, very recently as well. I can't go into that because it's confidential. But yeah, so I don't myself think about it a lot. I've read up on it, and I love the book, which is written by a wonderful lady called Felicity Warner, and her book is called Safe Journey Home, and it's about how to support someone that you love while they're in their last minutes, moments, years, months, whatever, of life. So it's, if you've had a family member die or they are dying, then definitely go out and get them a copy of the book Safe Journey Home, because it's about the whole thing to do with death. And in the UK now, we've got things called death doulas. I don't really like that word. I much prefer what Felicity Warner talks about. She calls them as soul midwives. So you're midwifing someone into a different stratosphere, a different plane, a different place. And I don't think there's any agreement much about people's beliefs in death, and obviously their experiences of it, because not too many people partially die or half sort of die or have near-death experiences. But we'll go into that, otherwise it's going to be a very long podcast. So the fact that you think about it a lot, I wouldn't say is the Pluto in the first house thing. I think it's more a case of the fact that your Mercury is so imaginative anyway, and your ruling planet to it is Neptune, which is retrograde in your third house of communication. So there must have been a point, I mean, you said when you were younger that if you had an accident, saw yourself bleeding, you always thought you were dying. But people can worry about death much more until they have experienced it, especially if they've had an experience of it being reasonably peaceful, which it was in my younger sister's case. So I supported her while she was passing. I was there with my cousin and two of the care home nurses. So even though it was distressing beyond belief, because it's a sibling of mine that I really loved, the actual moment of it was, in one sense, it was sort of interesting seeing what the body did. So that was, I'd never seen that myself with my own eyes, heard it with my own ears, and sort of felt it in the room. So that was, I don't want to use the word interesting because that makes it sound as if I'm some sort of, I don't know, voyeur or something. But it was, no, I'm not going to say the word nice. But it was it was actually the nurse that said to me after she had passed, she said that was very peaceful. It seemed quite noisy towards the end because her breathing changed rather rapidly. But that's apparently what happened. So she said that was a really peaceful death. And I thought, oh, well, that's good. And it wasn't, because now that I'm older and various things have happened, have come across it that much more. The older you get, the more likely you are to. Yeah, I'd agree with what that nurse said. Yeah, that it was a peaceful passing, and as I say, astrologically for her it was Jupiter. But because I live on the planet and I've got a Leo ascendant and it's ruled by the sun, I don't like thinking about it a lot, because I'm talking about now, I prefer to be thinking about life rather than death, because for the exact same reasons that you've said, is because life itself, what's the word you used? Allows you to enjoy the beauty and briefness of life. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I do that as well, the beauty and briefness of life, but I'm not thinking about the death thing. So I'd have to sort of interrogate you in a consultation. When was it that you started to be considering this? You know, where does that come from? Is it from yourself or someone else in your family or whatever? Yeah. Okay, so going to the chart, you have got a bit of a splash chart. You've got the majority of your planets away around the circle. You've got some empty houses, but that's not what chart shape's about empty houses. It's about signs that you don't have. So you don't have anything in Capricorn, you don't have anything in Taurus, and you've got nothing in Leo or Virgo, but you've got all the other signs of the zodiac in your chart. So it's sort of a splash chart shape-wise. You've got a bit of a grand trine going on, I think, that unites your Saturn, your Uranus and your Venus. Yeah, it does. So that's all in air signs. So that's pretty lush. Grand trines are friendly internal aspect shapes, which is different from chart shape, that you can rely upon when the shit hits the fan. So if you have a nice, friendly grand trine in your chart, or anything that's of blue description, so sextiles or trines make it, that's a sort of a superpower that you can rely upon when things get tricky. And with it being in air signs are pretty fast. They're not the fastest signs, because that's fire signs are the fastest. Now, the thing is, you have no earth in your chart whatsoever. So we could say, in a way, that you're not entirely practical. I'm not saying you're not managing life or anything, but it's interesting coming across people that have no earth in their charts. Yes, you've got an earth sign ascendant, but you have no planets in Capricorn, no planets in Taurus, and no planets in Virgo. So there is no earth in your chart. And there's a lot of air, that's predominantly air. There's 2 planets in fire, and you've got 3 planets in water. And I remember reading a book a while back, a particular astrologer had done some research in it, and she said the one element that seemed to be missing the most in people's charts, which I thought was interesting, was Earth. But then you've got to think about outer planets, because Uranus has just spent a long amount of time transiting through Taurus, which is an Earth sign, yeah. And I was born when Pluto was in Virgo, so it was in Sun Virgo for absolutely yonks. So there are probably going to be generations of people that don't have a lot of Earth in their chart, and your outer planets are in air and fire, yeah. With me? Because you're born in the 70s and I'm born in the 60s. So having a fascination about death, and also you say a healthy fear of it, I don't know where that has come from, but I wouldn't say there's a particular astrological signature for that. It's more about the transformation that death brings, because most people only do it once, and somewhere along the line. Now, that's the thing. Pluto will definitely, if you want to talk about a planet for obsession, you didn't use the word obsession, you said, I just quoted it, hold on. Fascination. You've used fascination. Now I would challenge that, and I would say make sure your fascination doesn't become an obsession, because Pluto is definitely the planet of obsession. If someone's going to get obsessed about anything or anyone or anything, it will be, the guilty party will always be Pluto. So I tend to advise people with Pluto in the first house, like yourself, make sure that your fascination doesn't turn into an obsession, and so make sure that you restrict it in some way. So you put some caveats up. If I find that I'm spending more than 4 hours reading articles about blah, 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 I'm going to set my alarm to stop myself from doing that. Pluto is definitely the planet of obsession. I hope that helps. So you are a registered nurse, so lush, that does suit your chart. And the sun in the 7th does mean that you will be happier in a close personal relationship. So we have to look at the location of the sun. Where is your life purpose orientated towards? And the 7th is about close personal relationships. I don't think your sun and your moon are square to each other, but they're both in cardinal signs. Yeah, they're out of order because you've got sun sign 10 degrees Aries and moon sign 22 degrees Cancer. So those are both cardinal signs, and if your moon was a little bit earlier, it would form a square to your sun sign. And I was looking at, I love doing this bit, what aspects are there between the first two personal planets, so the sun and the moon, because I was looking at somebody's chart the other day and they didn't have any aspects to their sun sign. The sun sign was completely unaspected apart from Pluto, which is what you have, but thankfully you've also got a trine to Neptune, so the sun trines Neptune, because Neptune's in a fire sign as well. But the only other aspect that your sun sign makes is the opposition to Pluto. So I would more argue for the case that you're more likely to be obsessed about anything, anything. It's just happened, that's where obsession lies at the moment. Fascination. But when the sun and Pluto are in opposition, because the sun is who we are, Pluto's about deep change and transformation, when you've got an opposition, you're going to swing from one thing to the other, and in swinging from one to the other, there isn't a balance to it. So you need to find the balance between the two planets. So it's close personal relationships and out there in the world, and close personal out there in the world. So go to that middle place, and obviously the middle place astrologically is the 4th house, because that's the one between the 1st and the 7th, and your 4th house is empty. So it might be that you need to put some more energies into your house or your home. It starts in the sign of Sagittarius, but your Jupiter's located in the 6th, which is the house of health and healing. Your Jupiter's happy mind, just like a Lucal. The other thing that we always need to consider is planets that are happy in the signs they're in. So you've got Jupiter in Pisces, well happy that is, because that's the old ruler to Pisces. The modern one is Neptune, and your moon's in Cancer, so yay again. The moon's happy in that sign. It is in the 10th, and that's your career, so you are going to be more emotional about the career that you have, because it's Cancer, which is an emotional sign. So you need to have work that involves caring and emotions, so I've got a student that has that, different sun sign, but the moon in Cancer in the, I'm sure this is in the 10th, yes, because it's the same Virgo ascendant. So needing to use emotions in the work that you do, which you would have to being a nurse, because a nurse isn't just about sticking needles in people and clearing up and giving injections, plasters on and stuff. There's also the consideration for the person themselves as human beings. And you've got Saturn in the 10th, where now Saturn's happy in the 10th. So there's some nice things in your chart whereby a planet is either in a sign that it's happy in, so Jupiter in Pisces, and what was the other one I said? Jupiter's in the sign of Pisces, yeah, and the moon in the sign of Cancer, so you've got that. And you've got a planet that's happy in that house, so you've got Saturn in the 10th. And these are things to keep in mind. Certain things will be happier in certain places and in certain signs than other things. So that's, that magnifies and cheers up the expression of something somewhere, yeah. So I hope that's helped you understand your chart a little bit more. There is another opposition that you've got, which I think your Mars is opposition to your Neptune. Yeah, so we have to remember it's a bit like ping pong. When one planet aspects another, then that aspect will carry on. And in your case, Mercury squares to Neptune, which is opposition to Mercury's opposition to Mars. Is that right? Mercury is square to Mars, and Neptune is opposition to Mars. So that forms a little sort of, I can't really remember what the game was. Anyway, it goes ping to here, ping to there, ping back. So that's going to be a constant in your chart. Mercury to Neptune to Mars. Mercury to Neptune and Mars. It forms because they're squares to each other and then an opposition. So the energies are going to ping around from that. Because sometimes you can come to a dead end. You'll have, like, for instance, your Pluto is opposition to your sun sign. It then the sun forms a trine to your Neptune. Is that right? Sun forms a trine to Neptune, yeah. But it's not going to ping back, because once it's gone to Neptune, I suppose there's a sextile back to your Pluto. So you've got these different energies. Always look at the way that planets go from one to the other. It's a bit like playing chess. Do they then go back in a more friendly way or in a more challenging way? Because obviously red lines are challenging, blue lines are more friendly. So there's a lot of activity in your chart, all these planets having lots of discussions, but your sun sign, as I mentioned earlier, only has two aspects, which is a trine to Neptune, which is an outer planet, and an opposition to Pluto. So there's less likely that your sun sign understands themselves and who they are, because that internal dialogue that you've got with everything else doesn't go on. Whilst your moon forms a trine to your Mercury, so your moon and your Mercury have lovely conversations and stuff. And then the next aspect it makes is a square to Uranus. Sudden happenings. Ignore the sesquidrates and all these other flapping things. Don't take those into account. So actually, your moon only forms two aspects. Now, I've seen people's charts where there's hardly any aspects going on. So there's not much internal dialogue. And so in your case, because your sun sign doesn't make that many aspects, especially not to any personal things, but your moon does, you might need to, inverted commas, listen to your moon more than to your sun sign, because the sun sign is a rational part of ourselves, whilst the moon is the emotional part of ourselves, yeah? So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's added a little bit of illumination to yourself and your chart. Obviously, I've only covered a smidgen of what you have there. I'm not doing transits or anything. It's just to answer your question. Does Pluto in your first house indicate an obsession with death? No, it doesn't. But it does indicate a fascination or an obsession with something. Because you could equally have that and be obsessed with racing, driving or something, or aeroplaning or whatever. I've just found on my hard drive the computer program that I can't use anymore because the flipping thing has deceased. Apparently you don't say the word death anymore now. You're supposed to say unalive, because otherwise it gets caught by filters. So he says here, the guy that wrote this, Pluto is the outermost planet in the solar system. In some senses, occupies now the place once held by Saturn, an association with outer darkness. In mythology, Pluto was lord of the underworld and hence obviously associated with death, but also by his very existence with life in death, and thus also with transformation and hidden truths secrets, and great power. Standing on the edge of the galaxy, he has, together with the other outer planets, Uranus and Neptune, been described as ambassadors of the universe and our first point of contact with the unknown powers and forces which move in the depths of outer space. This is the quote I wanted. So, Pluto in the first house. I suppose you might call this rather a romantic placement. A first house Pluto is seen as giving you a dark, emotional and intense side. Early life might be hard, so that you keep your real self hidden and develop a aloof exterior. In fact, you sound just like someone out of a Victorian novel. Why all the drama? Well, Pluto indicates the house of revolution, problems and regeneration, and that's your centre. Yeah. So there yes, I hear what you've asked, but there are other ways of considering Pluto in the first house. Anyway, today we've been talking about Wendy's chart, and thank you very much to Wendy for sending your data in. Truly appreciate it. And I'll be back next week, so I hope you have a fab week. Bye-bye now.